probably go. Well, good morning. Thank you for joining this breakout session. Ben, our president, was speaking earlier on stage about our managed service offering, the FlexCare, and I just want to throw out a little fun fact about that. M365 Security Enablement is a new offering within FlexCare. It offers a quarterly scan of your M365 environment along with quarterly meeting with security engineer where you will receive and report and get recommendations. So the title of this one is The Future of Virtualization and Hypervisor Platforms, Navigating Your Next Move. There's two presenters, John Ryan and Roger Lund. John Ryan is our technical solutions specialist for NCI. John works as one of our sales engineers and our technical sales team as a part of quoting and scoping process. John works with customers to identify technology opportunities, to help solve problems and provide more efficient infrastructure solutions. John works closely with the service engineers to research and develop solution quotes and scopes of work for projects. Roger Lund is our solutions architect. Roger evangelizes virtualization by night and is a solution architect by day at Network Center, day and night. He has over 20 years of experience in the industry, specializing in virtualization, cloud, and disaster recovery and backup, networking, and storage. Roger has spoken at conferences such as VMworld and is a tech field day delegate. He also is a VMware expert and a social media influencer and blogger at www.vbrainstorm.com. Boy, you've had that for a long time. Recent licensing shifts have forced many businesses to reevaluate hypervisor decisions. They thought we're all settled. The session offers a practical, vendor-neutral framework to choose what's next. Nutanix AHV, Scale Computing, Microsoft Hyper-V, Azure Public Cloud, with a focus on small, mid-sized organizations to learn how to right-size and migrate with confidence. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, that was all the time that we needed to fill, basically.
Yep.
Is what he said. Yeah, so some of you may have worked with us before in the past. So TSS is what we're referred to, Technical Solutions Specialist. And a lot of times we'll get engaged by the salesperson to talk about technology, to talk about, in this case, like hypervisors, right? We're talking about virtualization. We're talking about maybe making a change, maybe not making a change. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take you through kind of that journey of some of the hypervisors that are available out there and basically how to kind of determine if there's a change that's being needed or if you are set where you're at, but just kind of take you through that. We're not going to tell you how to pick one, like you should choose this one, but we are going to talk about like the differences in some of the common ones that are out there. So the agenda, virtualization landscape changes. What has changed over the years? I think we've kind of assumed that your virtualization platform is just there doing its job, probably doing it decently, right? But what are the landscape changes that are maybe indicators to move to a different type of virtualization platform? We're going to look at the framework for picking a hypervisor. So what kind of key indicators do you look at to determine what kind of hypervisor you should have? It could be the one you have in place, could be a new one that's out there. We're going to look through some of the hypervisor platforms. Roger will take you through a handset of them and just talk about the differences in the different type of hypervisor platforms. And then we'll talk about migrating to them. So what could you consider? How do you plan for it? When is the best time to make a change? It's a pretty substantial piece of your environment, so it's not going to be a quick, easy licensing change. It's typically a kind of a wholesale change of your hypervisor platform. So what changed? Licensing shifts. Probably some of you are here because of the VMware licensing change. But basically, subscription-based models now instead of perpetual licenses. I think some of you might still be on perpetual licenses, but those are on the way out. Perpetual licenses are you buy it once, you get kind of that version of the license, and then you get any kind of support upgrades within that license track. Subscription models are yearly license fees, allow you for upgrades to newer technology or newer versions, and then give you all of the support. New minimums and bundles. If you are part of the VMware crowd, you'll know that they have 72 core minimum now. So for smaller environments, you might end up paying quite a bit more in your licensing fees than you're used to per year.
As of now, that might change.
As of now, yeah, we'll see what happens with that. And then partner program changes. So some of those programs are changing now away from MSPs or away from certain partners and are just either going direct or working with larger entities for support and installation. And what this does is basically make SMBs forced to reevaluate your platform. So I think we kind of all thought, this is probably the last hypervisor I'm ever going to buy. It's doing everything I need it to do, but maybe there's other things out there that we can look at, that different features. There's a lot of different type of features in the hypervisors that are out there that allow you for different type of snapshotting, different type of performance, pooling of resources. And so maybe now is a good time to take a look. And then an urgent need to clarify entitlements and renewal. What's the commitment? How long do we have to commit for? What's the kind of the duration or age of the life cycle of the product?
So, virtualization landscape changes. What does that mean to me, right? So first off, who here is using virtualization? Excellent. So you guys are in the right room. Perfect. So, if, I'm going to just back up a little bit, right? So I've been using VMware since beta, right? So we're talking about like in the late 90s. So, I led the VMUG in Minneapolis for a number of years. And as well in St. Cloud. So, I have a very heavy background in VMware and virtualization. So, been doing this a while, right? But as you know, things change in IT, right? So what does that mean to me? That means that things like cloud and AI come, and how do I adopt that, right? Along the way. So a lot of changes out there. In the industry. So that's, John talked about subscription a little bit. So what does that mean? Well, it means that I don't have a perpetual license for a product anymore. That means that I'm not just paying, maintenance year over year. And so to what he alluded to, it means that I should be looking to see if I'm on the right platform that meets my business needs now, and maybe that's every year I look at that, right? What does that mean? In the future. So part of what we're going to talk about today is going to be all the different, technologies we talk through, but also a little bit about how to document what's important to me as a business, right? So, but cloud and AI are two things that we've been talking a lot about. AI will be something that we all talk about more and more as we go on. So, how we decide, right? We talked a little bit about this, but licensing entitlements is important. Who here is still on like a socket-based, perpetual license for your products? So there's definitely a few of you who's, just out of curiosity, who's using VMware today? Okay, currently, yeah. So a good half of you, and of those people, who's like already moving to something else? Okay, so 2 or 3. So, there's definitely great convergence, I don't know what you want to call it, of people out there looking at different things. So how do you decide what to go through, right? And, there's a lot to it, right? It's not just feature sets, it's, compatibility, right? It's operational, like how do I do this every day? How do I run it? Right? Does it have the resiliency that I need for my business day-to-day operationally, right? So those things are important. What's support look like? Who do I call? What's the process look like? Do I have 5 phone friends that I can call if I break something, right? Because you've got that, right? Today, you've got those relationships with people running the same thing as you are, and that makes a difference. So So, get through into the weeds, right? So, what we're going to do is kind of go through all of these things in detail. And what I plan on doing is specifically calling you guys out and making you uncomfortable along the way. So, John, you want to talk about these real quick, and then
Yeah.
I'll get into the weeds?
So obviously, lots of virtualization platforms available today. The ones that we're going to focus on are ones that we install and support at Network Center. So Nutanix has the AHV hypervisor, which is their branded hypervisor. Hyper-V, I think everybody's pretty familiar with that. Scale computing, that's another one that's been around for a while, but relatively kind of getting a little bit more looks now that the VMware craze is starting to happen. Azure, a lot of people don't think of that as a hypervisor type of environment, but it is a virtualization environment that's just in the cloud. It doesn't have the licensing model that a lot of these other ones do. It's just part of your resources. So, and then VMware, we still recognize that as a viable hypervisor platform that we still support and install. So, and I think one of the things to do when you're looking through it is seeing which one fits the best for your use case, right? So you don't want to just look at the feature set of it, but you want to look at your data in your virtualization environment and find out what that fits into, as opposed to just looking at the overall feature set of the product. Make sure it fits, make sure it's good for your industry and your business. And then don't be afraid to mix on-prem with cloud solutions. So because you're virtualized on-prem doesn't mean everything has to be virtualized on-prem. So a lot of customers will use 365 to maybe move some of their file server workload to the cloud using OneDrive, Teams, SharePoint, and maybe taking those VMs out of their environment and moving towards a cloud, kind of a hybrid type mixture.
Yep. So it's, who here knows what Nutanix is? Okay, got a couple people, right? So Nutanix is a platform that I've been using, deploying for customers since 2014, Greg? I don't know. So I suppose that means that I'm old, but been doing that for a number of years for clients, so it's easy for me to talk about, right? So one of the things that's, everybody's heard of some of these terms, so I'm not thinking in it too much, but HCI, what is that, right? Hyperconverged infrastructure, what does that mean, right? That means that instead of having a separate SAN, separate hosts, I've got a single solution, single platform, right? What is its strengths? It is a scale-out solution, but also scale-up solution, right? Which makes it a little bit unique. It is a vendor agnostic solution. What does that mean, right? That means that they don't care what hardware you run on as long as it's on their HCL. It could be Dell, it could be Lenovo, it could be HP, it could be, whatever, right? They don't care if you run Hyper-V or VMware on it, and it comes with their solution, which is KVM-based solution, AHV, right? So flexibility is there, right? Just like any scale-out solution, you have a minimum number of nodes. You can add nodes, and resiliency is built in. The thought process is kind of like cloud. You expect failure, right? So generally you start with 3 or 4 nodes, and you can unplug one, and things will just realign. Keeps going. You don't have a performance hit, right? The idea is no more RAID. That world goes away, right? But great solution for anybody wanting a private cloud ecosystem. So they have SASE products that can go on top of it. There's a lot of deep ecosystem stuff there, and I'm not going to get into that level, but great solution that we've been using for a number of years that kind of meets the criteria. So before I get to the next one, though, anybody have questions around Nutanix at a high level? Perfect. Next. Who here is running Hyper-V? Going to be. Got one. Wow, only 2 people?
Oh, there was a couple over here.
Oh, right, right. Excellent. Okay, it's somewhat hard to see the light. So you know, Hyper-V is not a new product at all, right? Microsoft has included that since 2012,
Yeah.
I think. So yeah, it's been around a number of years. So the interesting thing about Hyper-V is that, you know, it does scale pretty decently, right? It uses Microsoft clustering, so, you know, to be able to cluster that solution. So, you know, it's got the same feature sets as your other hypervisors. People don't think about that as an option a lot of times, right? What's nice about it is it's included in your licensing, you know, because it doesn't matter what hypervisor you're running. If you're running Microsoft, you need to license your hardware underneath, right? So in that process, you're licensing yourself to be able to run Hyper-V. So that's pretty cool. You know, it has the ability to be managed with Admin Center. You can use, you know, the Microsoft suites to do more than that. If you were running a bigger environment, it would make sense to, you know, to do that. You know, patching is pretty straightforward if you've patched Windows, right? You can use group policy to do some interesting things there. So, you know, you can do DR, you can do replication, you can do live migrations. It's got kind of the same functionality. So something we're talking about more and more with clients. You know, I've been doing more and more as, you know, the landscape changes a little bit. So questions around that at all?
I'd say it's the most targeted one for people from VMware to migrate to, if they want to get off the VMware licensing model. Yeah.
One of the downsides I've heard a lot that Hyper-V makes sense if you're running a Microsoft ecosystem. If you've got Linux boxes, if you've got other boxes like that, that becomes problematic. It was an easy choice for us because we are an entirely Microsoft shop, so that made sense for us to move to Hyper-V, but I'm currently in that migration right now.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to, like, you know, what's important to the business, right? You know, what does your ecosystem look like today? You know, do you have expertise in Windows, right? If you aren't running Windows very much today and you have a lot of expertise in, you know, in VMware in the past, it might make sense to look at something else, right? If you need ability to scale out rapidly, you know, it might not make sense. You know, if you want to have a HCI solution, you want something that's very small or in the rack, again, probably doesn't make sense because generally you're going to want to SAN with this unless you're running a very small environment, right? And so do you have space for a SAN? Do you know, have expertise to manage a SAN, right? Do you have all the components that you have? So all those things come into play. So scale computing, hypercore, again, something that I've been doing a number of years. It is a little bit different take on scale, a scale out solution. So what's cool about scale computing is you can start very small, you know, and it's a very like turnkey solution. What I mean by that is very rapid, you know, from the rack stack, like able to get the thing functional, right? I can manage multiple clusters in single interface very easily, very lightweight, right? It doesn't take as much, I should say, you don't have to have as many resources as some of the other scale out solutions, right? So, you know, vendor support direct, very good through partner as well. So again, it's a different option. It's also KVM based, right? So scale computing is very neat for customers that are looking for maybe not a Microsoft solution, right? So any questions? Anybody using scale? I should ask that first. Anybody using scale here? Okay. Any questions about them at all? Yeah.
This is the first time I've heard of scale. What would be the upside for this compared to
So yeah, I mean, upsides for Hyper-V is, again, it's an HCI solution, right? So, you know, a very small condensed box, like every node's gonna have RAM, storage, you know, CPU in it, and so I can just add another node. scale my resources, you know. And again, it's predictable performance-wise, cost-wise, right? Like I need, you know, let's say I make an acquisition, okay? And right now I've got 4 nodes and the acquisition is 3 times as big as me. Well, it's an easy math equation to say I just need to add, you know, 12 nodes or 10 nodes, and I don't have to look for a new solution. I just have to have enough networking ports, right? So very easy to just kind of scale that solution. It's also very easy to do multi-site locations. So I've got a location now, we make an acquisition, or we grow as a company, and I now have 2 more locations. And I need to have my data replicated over all of the locations, right? I can do that very easily in a solution like this. I can stand up multiple sites, I can manage them all in a single pane of glass, I can replicate data between them, right? So again, instead of having to have a team of SAN experts and fiber channel or iSCSI experts, you know, to run these things, it's very easy, right? So that's the concept. So any other questions around that at all? Okay. Who here has heard of Azure? Excellent. That'd be weird if I like brought it up and everybody's like, what is this cloud thing? So, I mean, this is something I think that you don't think of as an option sometimes, like John alluded to earlier. But I think this is something that most of us should be considering at some level, right? Does it mean that your entire environment runs there? No, right? And I'm not going to say this is the year of the cloud, like we used to always say, this is the year of the VDI, right? We used to say that all the time. So, but you know, there's some advantages, right? Pay-as-you-go licensing or reserved licensing means that, hey, if I've got, you know, workloads that make sense to put up there, it's included in that cost, right? So it also means that my Microsoft licensing for SQL or something is included in that cost, right? So there's some definite benefits on the licensing side, in my opinion, right? Super fast, rapid provisioning, burstable workloads work great in the cloud, right? Managed patching, and I'm going to say a huge, huge marketplace of products, right? You know, you can probably guess about what you could do there, and it's probably there, right? Just like every product you can imagine is out there. So ecosystem is just, you know, huge ecosystem out there. Just anything you can think of, right? So that could be, you know, you want to be able to, you know, have a product that lets you do, you know, I don't know, like data warehousing, right? I don't have to like necessarily build a solution by myself. I can just go pick something in the marketplace and it just ties into the solution and I can rapidly deploy that, right? So those types of things are really cool in the cloud. So it's also, again, you can, if you can do math, you can usually predict the cost pretty good, right? The thing about cloud, make sure your workloads make sense, right? Legacy applications sometimes are CPU heavy or storage heavy. That in the cloud has a cost, right? Again, I'm going to pick on RDS. That can be fairly expensive in the cloud. You know, sometimes it makes more sense to look at the VDI solution in Azure in that case, right? But if you have homegrown applications, sometimes those need to be refactored before it makes sense to put them in the cloud, right? It's very easy to get a bill that is enormous if you're not careful. And so it's kind of like, you know, walking before you run out there. But, you know, I think that everybody should be considering probably running a domain controller at the very least in the cloud these days, just because the cost is almost nil. It's very easy to set up, you know, a site-to-site VPN tunnel, and then, you know, if for some reason a tornado comes through, plows your building over, you've got AD somewhere else, right? And maybe it makes sense to have other services out there. Maybe test dev makes sense, right? And does it make sense to buy a second scale or Nutanix cluster or Hyper-V cluster just to run my testing twice a year, right? DR. Who runs DR here? Okay. Who runs DR in the cloud? one guy, right? So my point here is, does it make sense to make the capital purchase for DR on-prem or not? You know, we have to look at that, right? There's benefits of running it in-house. There's benefits of running it in the public, right? If you need to be able to have a certain season where you burst, maybe you have a workload that's set up to use during Black Friday, you know, if you're retail, right? And you can spin something up really fast. Maybe there's a report that you need to run twice a year on a reporting server that should, you know, that could be beneficial to run up there because you could get it in minutes instead of hours, you know? Those things are important, but, you know, things you don't maybe think about. So, anything I'm missing there? I think that's,
Yeah, I think just it also reduces your need for a robust backup solution because it's all on the cloud, right? So you don't have to have another set of hosts in a SAN at a DR location.
true. Let's make sure that we remind people that backup and disaster recovery are not the same thing.
Right.
So, you know, but to his point, your backup solution sometimes will do both, or it'll be a backup solution and it does replication, right? And so it's doing multiple functions. Well, in this case, you could eliminate that second function and just rely on having your DR in a cloud. But anyways, something to think about. And then, of course, understanding the support. What's that supportability look like? What happens if I need to create a ticket? You know, what does the normal SLA look like? Who are my partners that can support me? You know, does the product I run today support Azure? Right? You know, does it make sense? Maybe they offer a cloud version already. Does it make sense? Right? Going through some of that stuff means you know, some education along the way. So.
And I'll just plug Mike's session, the Cloudy with a Chance of Savings, is this afternoon. So if you do want to know more about moving to the Azure cloud and what that looks like, he does a session on that.
Yep. All right, so it sounds like we've got at least one other person in this room that has VMware. So I thought we would spend a little time kind of talking through this stuff, right? So who here, let me ask this, who here has moved to the new VMware licensing model? Who's moved to the new VMware licensing model? That's subscription-based. So a couple of you have went through that. And who's still running traditional socket-based? Okay. So I'll be the guy that tells you that changes are coming, right? So Broadcom's acquisition has made some changes to the VMware program. Gone are the days of essentials. You know, there's not even a product anymore that you can purchase. You will not be able to do standard licensing. You'll not be able to do Enterprise Plus licensing. So it's all going to be part of their VCF suite at some level, right? And so there's a minimum there. Right now, I believe it's 72. That might change. That might be 96. That might be bigger than that at some point. Now, there's some benefits there, right? You get the entire ecosystem that comes with those suites, ARIA and some of those other things, right? That maybe you don't have today. So you can do some cool things, forecasting, reporting, right? All those types of things. So, you know, pluses and minuses there, but expect that you're going to go to subscription-based licensing, and that, you know, pay attention to the cores you have, because cores are going to be what you have to have, right? So what does that mean? What am I talking about, right? So, you know, back in the day, I had dual core procs. I mean, not dual core, dual socket procs, right? So machines, I should say. So 2 sockets per server. Maybe I've got 3 servers, so I've got 6 socket licenses, right? Or I had 4, so I've got 8, right? Or maybe I had 4 processors per server, right? So all that changes. Now it's just cores. So, you know, if you had, let's just go with dual proc servers. So you had 6 sockets, but last time we refreshed them, they have 192 cores each. That's going to be a very expensive renewal for you, right? So keep that in mind. If you are staying VMware and, you know, you've got vendor reasons, like you're using multiple VMware products, I'm going to pick on NSX or You're already using ARIA, and you require that for reporting reasons and all these different things. And maybe you've got software vendors that only work on VMware and all those things. Just expect that you're going to see a jump in your renewals. Maybe next time you do a hardware refresh, if you aren't using all your CPU, go with less cores, higher clock speeds, right? Stuff like that. Start designing your cluster differently. Maybe breaking clusters apart, right? And so maybe instead of having one big cluster for everything, you've got something else that runs on a different hypervisor. You put some things in the cloud. You run one processor in some things, right? So some design changes might be coming for you guys if you want to stay VMware. So just keep that in mind. Make sure you understand what your renewal looks like. When does that come up? They won't renew, from my understanding, until like a month or so out. So don't expect to be able to get pricing way ahead of time. Just keep that in mind. Track your renewal dates, right? Otherwise, like I said, there are some benefits from VCF. But if you haven't looked at what that product is and all the components of it, take the time now, right? Make sure that you have a plan for it. So I expect there'll be at least one question, but maybe I'm wrong. Who's got questions? I'm going to start picking on people. Clint? I know, that's why I picked on you. No one? Okay, here we go.
Their kind of recent announcement that they're going to support all workloads. Do you see Zen Server potentially being an option, especially for existing Citrix customers who already have licenses?
Yeah, there's so many options, right? So when it comes to virtualization, there's so much, right? I had somebody come up the other day and ask me about OpenStack, right? I haven't talked about OpenStack in 15 years, So there's lots of options. Zen's definitely one of them. It's hard, like as an MSP, I have to be able to narrow it to a handful of things that I can, professionally support and recommend. It's not to say that I can't make a best effort approach at supporting you along your journey, but I also need to be able to say I've got 7 guys that know what this is, right? Zen is definitely a product that's been out there a long time, right? And if you're running Citrix, it makes sense, I think, in the light of that. But just keep in mind your support ecosystem. Like, what does that look like? Are you okay working right with support directly if you run into issues? Are you okay with a best effort approach for your other vendors that you rely on? Who do you know that's running it, right? Like, if you get stuck and support can't figure it out, who's your friend to phone home? Like who are you gonna call, right? Keep all that stuff in mind. Does your backup solution work with it, right? Like what you're using today, does it natively talk? Do you have to switch to agent backups, right? That makes a difference. DR solution, does your DR solution support that today? All those types of things make sense, right? So, again, when you're kind of writing your, pros and cons to the things that we're talking through, just keep all that in mind, right? So, good question. Anybody else? There's got to be somebody. Here we go.
The migration between platforms.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that. So that's a great question. So yeah, I'm going to say it depends. We'll go there. But yes, we're going to get into that next. Practical next steps. You want to talk through this and then?
Yeah, sure.
Catch my breath.
So back to kind of what Roger was saying about mapping cores, being prepared for any kind of subscription based costs, changes that might affect, what your existing licensing is versus the new licensing. So make sure you know what you're getting into so that first bill when it comes, it doesn't shock you. And then confirm partner coverage and escalation contacts. So where partners a lot of times have kind of a reseller or service relationship with some of the companies. If that partnership is not there, we get fired through the cannon just like you guys do, right? So I would say in some cases Azure is like that. We can troubleshoot a certain amount of it, but if you have to open up an Azure case, we have to sit and wait just like you guys have to. So, but make sure that meets your needs with the uptime and reliability of the solution. Evaluate portability. Basically, again, what kind of hardware can you put it on? Where does it make sense to run it? And then track license assignments. basically to find out what the all-in cost is. How long is this going to cost you over a year, 2 years, 3 years? What does the future look like on a licensing level?
And I think sometimes like pay attention to what you're running. Like, if you have peripheral, like you bought these socket licenses, you might have like, 4 clusters. I don't know. You might have a lot of different versions of VMware running a lot of different hosts. You might not keep track of that much, right? You might not know how much utilization I actually need per se, So all of those things you have to start looking at, right? Because in a subscription world, you need to work on sizing it for your workload, not necessarily for what your infrastructure has for capacity, right? So that world's a little different, right? So we have to kind of think about that and figure out what's that mean. So keep that in mind. So the easy stuff, John, you want to just kind of start it off and I'll get in the weeds?
Yeah, I think, and without just going through each one of these, what we're seeing as far as hypervisor changes, a lot of the manufacturers have migration tools that you can use to migrate from one platform to another platform. A lot of the instances where you're making a change, it's best to do it on a hardware cycle because then you can purchase the new hardware, spin that up next to the old hypervisor platform, and then work on migrating over to the new platform. It gets a little tricky if you just bought all of your hardware and now, you're forced or making a change with your hypervisor. You might have to do what I would consider like a ping pong kind of effect, have some kind of environment that you can bounce it off of, then take your production environment, reinstall that for, let's say, Hyper-V or whatever, and then, migrate your environment.
And that might
back,
mean swing gear, right? Or maybe you need to purchase, if it's a scale out solution, so let's say you have scale or you have something else. I'm going to pick on Nutanix. Let's say you're running Nutanix with VMware. There's ways to convert that in place to AHV, but you need, either on a separate cluster to do it, or you can like add a node and roll the node over. So there's a lot of things to talk through there.
And I think the concern with maybe buying hardware out of a purchase cycle, you have to look at the pricing of what the hypervisor pricing. So if you are in VMware and your hypervisor pricing is going to go up, what's that yearly cost versus what's a new piece of hardware, right? So and labor. So does it make sense to pay $20,000 for licensing for a year just to kick the can, or should you spend that money in hardware and the migration early? So
especially if like backup software has to change, and all those types of things. So just keep all in mind. And then of course, I'm going to talk a little bit about change control. Like what does the business need to, notify your clients? Like maybe there's outages that have to happen, right? When does that have to happen? Maybe you only can do that twice a year. Maybe, you only have a 3-hour window quarterly for downtime. What does that mean, right? How do I plan that with all these changes that I'm going through? So, what happens if it doesn't work, right? Like, how do I roll back what I'm doing? Talking through all that, basically planning all those things. Who do I tell as I'm doing it, right?
Yeah, and we do have some rental hardware that we're kind of trying to, kind of utilize as a temporary spot for that kind of, that bounce back or that ping pong kind of scenario, so.
All right, so how do we do it, right? To your question, depending on the solution, most of them have tools, right? The exception being maybe Microsoft. There are tools there, but that's probably the one that doesn't have like a canned solution. But in that world, we'd probably use either replication or backup software, to migrate things. Otherwise, Scale has a solution that they include with the product, depending, or you license separately, depending, right? And Nutanix has a free product called Move that seeds data and lets you cut over and all those things as well. We're a Veeam MSP partner, and Veeam lets you migrate between platforms pretty well, and so we use that, depending on your workload, right? It's going to take a long time to restore a 20 terabyte database with backups. So if you only have a 2-hour total window for all your downtime and it takes 6 hours to back up and restore a database, that's not gonna work, right? So then you have to use something that replicates the data, so understanding what tool that is, and then how do we test it, right? What's that pilot look like, right? So, cloning that VM, backing it up, replicating it, restoring it, seeing what that looks like. Did it work? Did it fail? How long did it take? Did it meet my SLA, my maintenance window? Did I remember to tell the right person when it was back up? Like who tests it? Like how do I test it afterwards, right? All those types of things. And then, the day of having a strategy, right? And then once it's moved, how do I back it up? How do I test restores? How do I do DR on it? All of those things come into play, right? And then, that's selfishly where we come in a little bit, right? But, having somebody to lean on that has done it before helps, right? Unless you really just want a challenge and, hey, power to you, let us know how we can help when you need help. We're here, right? But, understanding kind of that process. And realistically, that's what we're talking here is just helping you kind of lay it all out in your mind, put it down on paper, come ask us questions, come up with a plan, right? So we can implement it without having to have, some sort of a downtime event, right? So. Questions on this? It's got to be one. No? Excellent.
And I'd say the hard part about having a different backup solution with the new hypervisor platform is overlap, planning for overlap of old backups versus new backups and aging those out. And
Yeah, there's always, anytime you're switching from one product set to the next, there's cost overlaps, there's, you're paying for this while you're trying to implement this, and you know what this is like. And now you're supporting 2 solutions, and I have to keep it running here, and I got to track all this extra stuff. And so, do I have cooling for it? Do I have power for it? Right? Do I have network ports for both? All that stuff comes into play. It gets complicated pretty quick, but that's why we're here to assist. So key takeaways, I talked about a lot of things, but licensing, understanding what subscriptions mean to me, right? Understanding what my requirements are as a business, understanding what I can run versus need to run versus what's my workload look like. All of those things matter. What virtualization paths do we support today versus best effort approach, right? What does that look like? Can you help me get there? Have you done it before? All that stuff, right? So all those things, hopefully you can help kind of put it down to paper, on paper, and come see us at the booths, right? Because we can kind of talk more one-on-one, right? This is just to kind of get you thinking about maybe there's change coming, maybe there's not. Maybe I've already made this plan and I'm just here for validation to make sure that I'm, making the right choices along the way. So. And then we've got a lunch. John, you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, we'll be at the lounge, which is at the far side of the hall at 1 o'clock, hanging out there. So if you guys have individual questions about your specific environments and want to talk through it, obviously we can't quote anything there, but we can definitely talk through some options and
we can play Stump the Chump.
Yeah, knock around some ideas and everything. So,
question. Yeah, that's a loaded question, right? I think it depends on what you're using today versus, what you could do today, right? So what I mean by that is, like, obviously, the VMware ecosystem is vast, right? They've got their own data protection, they have their own replication built in, right? You could be using third-party products there. You could be using, encryption. You could be doing virtual TPM. There's so much stuff you could do there. You could be using fault tolerance, all these things. So a lot of it's going to be is, like, what do I need for feature sets? What am I doing today, right? If you're just doing, pretty minimal feature set on the VMware side, I'm going to say yes, right? I will say that I'm going to recommend that if you've got more than 2 hosts, you should be running Microsoft clustering. And if you don't understand how Microsoft clustering works, we should chat a little bit, talk through that, right? It's requires networking, some stable networking, for sure, right? Understanding how to fail between nodes to patch is important, right? What we don't necessarily want to have happen is you do have group policy set up to patch your Windows servers, and then both hosts just reboot at the same time and all your VMs on them, right? That's not great, you know? And we've all had that scenario where Windows updates break something. So how do I recover from that, right? How do I test that stuff, right? So there is some validation that goes into that. And just like anything else, like you walk before you run. But I think that's kind of where like the test pilot stuff comes in, is like, hey, maybe there's a period of time I should be running a test workload, right? On some new hardware, or, we talked about lease hardware, something like that, to be able to make sure that this makes sense, that I can support it, that it acts like I think it should act, that my backups are working, all those things, right? I think it's a little scary to consider on a Friday that we're shutting down VMware, that we're gonna format the disks, install Hyper-V, and then at 10 p.m., all of a sudden we're running Hyper-V, and like that's a scary thought in my head, right? So like I'm like, I mean, we can give it a best effort, right? Talked about best effort, right? But that's not really what we're going to be recommending, right? So, coming up with a plan, figuring out how it makes sense for the organization that you're working with, in your budget, and your maintenance windows, and all that stuff is kind of like how we get there, So, is that a really short answer for no? So, yeah.
So, I like that you brought up the cloud, and one of the, there's a lot of cool things about the cloud, but one of the challenges with it is, like, if you've got low latency requirements. My organization absolutely does have some low latency requirements, and so what I'd like to do is, like, integrate cloud and on-prem, and so I've looked at, like, Azure Local and Azure
Yep.
Stack as
Yep.
possible solutions there. How do these other platforms, do they have integrations where they can play nicely with Azure, and how does that look?
Yeah. So, yes. There you go. So, I mean, I'm going to say yes. Most of them have integrations, right? Again, Scale and Nutanix are both scale-out solutions. They do it very differently. One is a kind of like agnostic on the hardware and software side. It runs on a public cloud, right? And the other one is kind of like I can be really fast, really light, really nimble. So again, different solutions. But I'll talk on the Nutanix side a little bit, because I can say that if you wanted to do Azure, you can run Nutanix on Azure, right? So I can run it on bare metal. If you license your cluster and you have a fire, you can spin that up legally, like with their licensing on top of that, right? So there's a lot of options there. Now, let's shift slightly. So, what if, what's latency is important to me, right? I want a simple solution that I can manage. Latency is important. Scale-out solutions are great for that, because of the fact that the data is generally laid down on the local device and spread across your network. What is important is your network, right? So what's that mean? That means that I need 10 gig in some cases. On the Nutanix side, 25 gig comes up, right? Again, they're a little bit different, those two solutions, so you kind of have to see what makes sense for your business. But those are great solutions. And like I said, one of them is kind of made for speed of deployment and simplicity, and the other one's more about ecosystem stuff. So a little bit different solutions. Each has their pluses and negatives, for sure. But I guess that's where I would start, would be if I'm kind of looking for high performance but simple, scale out, right? If you want a traditional hypervisor with really fast storage, you look at a SAN with Hyper-V, right? And then what services make sense on cloud, and we start talking about all that world. Now, to your point, you can do a lot of interesting things with Azure Stack and Azure Edge in that world. You start though having to rethink about how do I connect to the cloud at that speed, right? So sometimes it means that I have to get a direct connect. Okay, so that's like a 10 gig pipe basically to the cloud provider. Sometimes that isn't an option where my data is today. So maybe that means I have to move my entire data center to a colo, right? So that's something to consider, right, in that scenario. So, and does that make sense? Like, there's a lot of a lot of things that you got to talk through in that scenario. But that's a great question. Yes, but it depends, and I think the timing is right to maybe look at the big picture, right? So, more questions? Right back.
You guys know anything about HPE Morpheus Essentials?
So, again, not something that we do a lot of, but I am familiar with Morpheus, right? So, definitely is an option, right? It is I'm going to throw it in the bucket of, containerized and VM hypervisor platforms, right? Kind of like Proxmox is. Yeah, a good solution, especially for a partner that's strong on the HP ecosystem. We do some HP, but, Lenovo is generally our lead forward on the server side, so it's not something that we deal with on a daily basis, right? So it'd be a best effort approach for us. But, I mean, it is a strong product. HP has great support there. So, and again, understanding what that support looks like, I think, is important. But there is, it's the hard part, right? There's like 50. I mean, we could talk about things for hours about virtualization. There's so much you could do or grow your own. I mean, and again, it's about supportability, understanding how it fits in your ecosystem, and all of the framework that you have to put around it to make it work. So, good question, though. Any others? All right. Well, look forward to hopefully seeing you guys at 1 o'clock. And yeah, hit us up at the booth. And I like to talk, so don't hesitate.